Diabetes Connections is brought to you by One Touch. Every touch is a step forward. By Dexcom, take control of your diabetes and live life to the fullest with Dexcom. By Tandem Diabetes Care, makers of the T-Slim X2 insulin pump. And by Real Good Foods, real food you feel good about eating.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
This week, hard to believe, but a natural disaster was the spark that helped bring a popular diabetes device to the U.S. A Frio is a handy little way to keep your insulin cool. Dan Katzki was diagnosed with type 1 as an adult, and during the San Francisco earthquake 1989, he lost power.
When your insulin's in danger, it feels like you're oxygen deprived. You get a little bit of a panic if you're not sure where your next insulin shot's going to come from. And so I experienced that. Happily, there's no dramatic ending here. The electricity came back on and everything was fine.
Not wanting to go through that anxiety again, Dan and his wife Lisa found the Frio product and brought it to the U.S. How it was invented is another great story. We'll tell that too. Our community connection this week, you hear me talk about diabetes conferences, but of course it can be difficult to travel to those. I'm going to tell you about a virtual conference coming up in May. And tell me something good. A huge milestone for a diabetes advocate we've spoken to before, 1,000 blog posts. And it's Renza Scibilia's 21st Diversary too. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to another week of Diabetes Connections. So glad to have you along. I am your host, Stacey Sims. We aim to educate and inspire about type 1 diabetes by sharing stories of connection, talking to the movers and shakers in our community, asking hard questions of the healthcare companies, and discussing everything from technology to day-to-day, everyday stuff with type 1, right? My son was diagnosed right before he turned 2 back in 2006. He is now 14, finishing up middle school. My husband has type 2 diabetes. I don't have diabetes myself. I have a background in broadcasting and local news and TV, radio. That's how you get the podcast. So as you listen to the show this week, the big news in my family is that we are counting down the days to the Avengers Endgame movie. If you follow me on social media, you probably already know that we're a big Marvel family. We have seen, it's been really fun. We've seen, I think, every movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the MCU. We didn't start out going to the theater because Benny was a little too young when the first Iron Man came out, but Slade, my husband Slade and I definitely saw those. And then we brought the kids into the fold when they were old enough. And I promise there is a diabetes tie into this. And so we are so excited. Now, the way schedules go, of course, the movie comes out. If you're listening as this episode is first released, the movie comes out this week. So the day that the tickets went on sale, I bought 4 tickets for Thursday night because it comes out Friday, but of course there's always that night before. And we did this with the last couple of movies in our local, we have a little movie theater in our town. It's so fun. People get dressed up. We don't get dressed up, but it's a really fun crowd. And then we realized that Thursday night, my husband has a commitment. So I went back online and bought 4 more tickets for Friday night. And as I said, it's a tiny little small town, and they're really great about returning tickets. Like you can go and say, hey, I bought these online, but can we trade them in? And they're always great about it. So I figured we'd pick a night. We'd probably go Friday night and go all together. Oh no, my kids want to go Thursday night with me and Friday night with their father. They don't want to miss out on seeing it early. So I'm not sure I'm going to see it twice, but they certainly are. I'm excited, but I'm kind of sad because it's kind of the end of an era. I personally think, I could be wrong, but I think this is going to be the peak of the superhero movies. When we look back on this in 20 years, it's going to be like, you know, how Westerns kind of went out of fashion, and then the disaster movies of the 70s and the diehards of the 80s and 90s. I know that there are a lot more movies coming, but I think it's going to peak with Endgame. All right, I could be wrong. And I said there was a diabetes tie-in. Okay, so here it is. So when Benny was little, and even before he saw the movies, he was into the Marvel characters. He was really into the Hulk. And so we used that to kind of explain how high blood sugars and to some extent low blood sugars made him feel. Because if you're a parent of a kid with type 1 who's below the age of, let's say, 7 or 8, I think a lot of people think their kid is hypo-unaware, but really they just can't articulate. And that changes as they get older. True hypoglycemia unawareness is very rare in kids, but it doesn't matter if your kid can't tell you. And certainly your 2-year-old isn't going to be able to say, hey, I feel low. Let's check my blood sugar. So when Benny was about, I want to say 5 years old, maybe 6, we started really using the Hulk to help him figure out why he felt so crummy when he was high. And he had a lot of issues being angry and acting out when he was high. And this really helped because you can see, of course, and I'm assuming you're all familiar with the Hulk, right? You've got Dr. Bruce Banner, who was pelted by gamma rays, and he turned into the Incredible Hulk. So he turns into the Hulk. He has no control over that. And we used to tell Benny the difference for you is that you can control it. Now, you can't control how you feel, right? You can't control if you're high, that you might feel angry or cranky and want to, do something. But you can control what happens next. So we would ask him, like, go to your room, throw pillows around, or, remove yourself from the situation, or just sit quietly with me, drink some water, and let's figure this out, or, And it really, over the years, really helped him. And so I have a picture of the Hulk with an inset. It's a little teeny Hulk toy. And that's become Benny's avatar on a lot of my Dexcom stuff and other stuff when I don't want to necessarily use his picture. So I'm really grateful to Stan Lee for more than just the movies. Okay, well, I'm sorry if you're not a comic book person. I know that was quite the detour from the usual, but hey, it's really just part of our lives and part of our story. We will be getting to the Frio, the people who invented this really cool device that a lot of us use in just a moment. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by One Touch. Have you ever tested your blood sugar with a meter and were unsure about the meaning of your result? Take the guesswork out of your numbers with the One Touch Vario Flex meter. It uses color short technology to instantly show you when your or your loved one's blood sugar numbers are low, indicated by blue, in range, green, or high, red, so you can quickly get on with your life. You could also use the meter's built-in Bluetooth smart technology to seamlessly sync with the One Touch Reveal mobile app, available now as a free download for Android devices on Google Play and Apple devices on the App Store. One Touch, because taking a step forward starts with seeing where you are. Benny was diagnosed in the wintertime. He was diagnosed in December. We didn't really worry about keeping insulin cool. We did go to Florida right away. I've talked about this 3 weeks after he was diagnosed. We went on vacation, a planned vacation to my parents' house in Florida. But I don't remember even thinking or worrying about the temperature of the insulin. I'm sure I had other things to think about back then. But that summer, I remember thinking, like, what are we going to do at the beach? We live in Charlotte, North Carolina, where it starts to get very warm. It can be 80 degrees sometimes in March. And of course, it gets warm all summer long. So the Frio was a really interesting find for us. And I know that many of you use it. It's not a refrigerated cooler. What the Frio is, if you're not familiar, it's a cooling case. It's fabric. It feels soft. And it's a reusable cooler. It's this proprietary evaporative material. So basically, the cooling properties come from the evaporation of water. When you activate it by getting it wet, it keeps its low temperature for a minimum of 2 days. So it doesn't keep your insulin or any other medication. It doesn't have to just be used for diabetes or for insulin. It doesn't keep it cold like a refrigerator would, but it keeps it cool. And that's what you need, as we'll hear more in the interview, for 30 days to keep your insulin from going bad. I reached out to Dan and Lisa Katzki, who run the Frio United States operation. As you'll hear, it actually was invented overseas, and the company is international, but they run the U.S. part of it. Now, Dan was diagnosed with type 1 as an adult, and Lisa is an RN, and she actually, even before Dan's diagnosis, specialized in emergency preparedness and emergency response. And you can see why they were a perfect pair to bring Frio to the United States. I realize as I'm talking about this kind of sounds like a commercial for Frio. And we've done some other product interviews before when I think the company's cool or the people behind it are cool. And that's really why I wanted to have them on, because I think their story is very interesting. And I think that a lot of us use the Frio and may not be getting the most out of it. And they explain a lot more about how to use it. So just a heads up, I always like to disclose, they didn't pay me for this interview. They didn't give me free Frios for the interview. Although I did ask them, they did send me a couple of Frio cases that I'm going to be giving away at my appearance at Friends for Life this summer. So they did give me a couple of wallets, but that was not in exchange for the interview. I just like to tell you probably more than you want to hear, but it's important to me that I'm transparent about all of that. Okay, enough setup. Here is my interview with Dan and Lisa Katzki. Dan and Lisa, thank you so much for joining me. I'm excited to learn more about this company and hear your story. Thanks for spending some time with me.
It's our pleasure. We're very happy to join you.
Excellent. Okay, we'll just jump right in. Dan, let me start with you. I want to get your personal story and learn more about you both, but tell me what Frio is all about for those who are not familiar.
Yeah, so Frio is an insulin cooling case, but what's unique about it is it's an evaporative insulin cooling case that never needs ice packs or refrigeration. So instead of getting the coolness from being dependent on refrigeration, it simply harnesses Mother Nature in that it uses evaporation, the endothermic reaction of evaporation, to create the coolness. So the way I always describe it for myself is I used to have an invisible chain to refrigeration, always dependent on refrigeration. And now that invisible chain is cut and I'm free.
That's really interesting because, and I guess we'll jump right into it, Dan, you live with type 1 yourself.
Yes.
Tell me about when you were diagnosed. How old were you? And share the story if you could.
Yeah, I was relatively old for juvenile diabetes. I was diagnosed in 1986, so I was 25 years old. And Lisa and I were actually on the road and crossing the country from California to New York. And during that time, I was actually diagnosed halfway across the country in Oklahoma. So I spent a few days in the hospital in Oklahoma and then just continued on our way.
Lisa, let me jump in and ask you, were you guys married then? Were you just kind of thinking, oh my gosh, am I going to stay with this guy? Like, what happened?
Well, we were married, actually, and absolutely I was going to stay with him. But the whole process, we were traveling, we were camping. Dan left out the best part of it. We were camping all the way across country, and the big thing was at night, anytime you had to go to the bathroom, you had to get out of the tent and go out. So it became quite obvious, the frequency, and all the symptoms were showing. And by the time we got to Oklahoma, we realized that there was something definitely wrong. And when we checked into the hospital, it was clear that it was diabetes. And then everything changed right then and there.
Yeah, so to give you a couple statistics on that, I counted 28 times in 24 hours of going to the restroom. I lost 60 pounds. And when I got to the hospital, my sugar was well over 800.
Now, Lisa, you have a healthcare background.
Correct. I'm an RN, but I was not a nurse then. I finished nursing school in 94.
Okay. So what was going through your mind at the time? I mean, I was joking, you're going to stay with him, but you must have been relieved that they figured something out.
Well, it was great that we figured out what it was, because when you are wondering what's going on, a whole myriad of things go on in your head. It was something that was easily fixable. Diabetes, something that's very treatable. But the whole routine of getting up and doing things was completely different. And for Dan, it was a whole big thing because we were traveling in the summer. It was hot. He had to take his insulin with him, and everything was an issue. Everything, whether or not there was going to be refrigeration, what if we wanted to go out on a hike, everything was an issue. Dan can speak more to that.
Yeah, so clearly at that point, everything changed. Frankly, it was sort of a relief because I did not know what's happening when you lose 60 pounds. You wonder what is going on. And then the funny thing is we were driving. I remember exactly. We were driving, and I opened up a newspaper, dating ourselves, a newspaper. And I remember it was on the back page, a big ad, something, to bring alertness to diabetes screening. And I'm going, oh, my goodness, those are my symptoms. And then
he checked off every single box on the list.
Wow. What a wake-up call.
So like I said, I was in the hospital for a few days. And coming out of the hospital, the diabetes educator comes and speaks with you and tells you what you're going to need to live with your entire life. And one of the issues was that I needed to be sure to keep the insulin cool at all times. So I remember we walked out of the hospital with one of those little igloo coolers and didn't go anywhere without it, and constantly when you're on the road, it was very difficult because constantly we need to find ice for the next few hours and then ice for the next few hours.
If we were lucky enough to have a hotel that had a refrigerator, the little ice packs that we had didn't fit into the refrigerator. So it took no less than 20 minutes of having to speak with a restaurant that might be close by to convince them to put one of the ice packs in the freezer. And 9 out of 10 times when we left, we would forget behind. We'd lose one. We had to replace so many of them over those first few years.
How long did it take you then to get to developing the Frio? Obviously, you saw the need for something like that pretty close to the beginning, Dan.
Yeah, so it was developed actually not by us. We are the U.S. distributors. We've been the exclusive distributors for over 10 years now. But If you're ready, I could tell you a story where truth is stranger than fiction regarding the origin of a Frio.
All right, hit us. We love those.
All right, I'll hit you up. There was a British gentleman, to be specific, a Welsh gentleman, who had a son who rode a horse. And as he was riding the horse, and bear with me on this, as he was riding the horse, he hit a branch and went into a coma. And the doctors told the father that clearly the only way his son's going to recover is to keep him cool, to keep him, at that below 98.6 in the 80s at all times. That will help his body heal. So the father, doing anything for his son, sort of developed that material that you now see on a Frio, the evaporative cooling, where you soak it and then it'll stay cool for days. And basically his son that was his blanket, so to speak, for weeks. And basically it helped him get through. So the next part of the story is his daughter was a world champion weightlifter. And she competed in the Commonwealth Games in Australia, where it was very hot. And at that time did not do well at all because it was too hot. So the father said, wait a minute. If I use the same evaporative cooling for my daughter, making headbands, wristbands, ankle bands, she'll do better. So sure enough, he did, and she did very well in the next competition. So then he said, wait a second, how about if I make a business of this? And so he made a business of the sportswear and sold it. One of his customers was a major chain in Great Britain. As it turns out, the buyer had a son who had type 1 diabetes and said, how about we use this technology to keep the medication cool? And that is the story of the origin of the Frio.
Did the boy who hurt himself recover? The boy in the coma?
Yeah, he did.
Oh.
This is now many years later, and he's doing just fine.
Wow, what a story. What a story. That's wild. Yeah,
so you never know where something comes from.
And how did you all hook up with Frio? Lisa, let me ask you, how did you all come to partner with them?
So we had been traveling overseas in very hot climate. We were in the Mideast, and we were with our children at the time, and going from one hotel to the other was a big issue, because if there was not enough refrigeration in the hotel, we had to go from one place to the other, make sure the other hotel had enough refrigeration. What if there was a problem? All of our hiking issues were an issue. We suffered through it, got through it. When we got back to the United States, Dan happened to open a magazine and saw the advertisement for this. And he ordered one, just say, okay, I'll give it a try. When he got it and tried it, he showed it to me and he says, Lisa, you have to bring this in. I had started a company doing emergency preparedness. We live in California. Safety and security is kind of my sweet spot. And we saw in 2 milliseconds how valuable this one product would be for the purpose of emergency preparedness. And Dan can specifically speak to that because we lived through the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake.
Oh, yeah. Tell us about that, Dan. And they will tell us about the earthquake in just a moment. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dexcom. And we started with Dexcom back in the olden days before Share. So trust me when I say using the Share and Follow apps really makes a big difference for us. Betty and I set parameters about when I'm going to call him, how long to wait, all that kind of stuff. It helps us talk and worry about diabetes less. If he's at a sleepover, if he's away on a trip, it gives me so much peace of mind. It also helps if I need to troubleshoot with him because we can see what's been happening over the last 24 hours and not just at one moment. The alerts and alarms that we set also help him from keeping the highs getting too high and to jump on lows before they're a big issue. Internet connectivity is required to access the separate Dexcom Follow app. To learn more, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo. Now back to Lisa and Dan talking about that earthquake. And I knew it, more commonly known as the San Francisco-Oakland earthquake of 1989, how that changed their idea of how they needed to secure Dan's insulin.
Right. So there's sort of two things. The thing that's unique about the Frio, the thing that's really beneficial about the Frio is for travel and for emergency preparedness. So this is where it hit me straight in the face. So Lisa already talked about the travel. Just before this, I was really reaching the point of I didn't even want to travel anymore because that issue of always trying to find a place to keep the insulin to freeze the ice pack and keep the insulin cool really sort of dominated the vacation. And then when you find a place, you have to go back and get it. It only gives you a few hours. You have to go back again. So that was the travel issue. Shortly after the Loma Prieta earthquake hit here in 1989. And it was in October where, you know, Mark Twain said the coldest winter was summer in San Francisco, which is true. But strangely, October gets very warm. And that was the case in 89 as well. So the earthquake happened, and electricity was out. As it turns out, it was out for about 3 or 4 days. But, you know, at the point that's out, you don't know how long it's going to be. Yeah. So I put my insulin in the freezer, you know, and the frozen peas that were still frozen served as sort of an ice box and sort of got me through those few days, but I didn't know what would happen if it would continue. Luckily, the electricity came back. But the emotion that I experienced was sort of like, I'm sure all of your listeners would know what I'm talking about here. When your insulin's in danger, it feels like you're oxygen deprived. You get a little bit of a panic if you're not sure where your next insulin shot's going to come from. And so I experienced that. Happily, there's no dramatic ending here. The electricity came back on and everything was fine. But it really, when I saw the Frio, it really sounded too good to be true, but it really addressed both of those issues, and I jumped on it.
That's great. All right, let's take a moment to just pause here and talk about the shelf life of insulin, because I do think there's a bit of a misunderstanding, not among you all, but, you know, sometimes with people who are newer diagnosed, that insulin has to be kept cold at all times or you can't use it at all. So, Lisa, let me ask you. Obviously, there are times when it does need to be kept cold, but can you just kind of go over the parameters of what is supposed to happen with insulin?
Stacey, I am so happy that you're bringing this point up because we hear these calls all the time. So according to the manufacturers, insulin for long-term storage does need to be refrigerated, and it needs to stay within the 36 to 46 degree temperature span. And that's generally what you need to do for insulin. You keep it in the fridge, and it's good until the expiration date as long as it's maintained at that 36 to 46 degrees. However, every single insulin, including pet insulin, does have what's called a travel excursion, and means that it can travel at a different temperature for a specific period of time. And for insulin, that temperature it needs to stay at or below room temperature. Room temperature in general has been, control room temperature is basically in the 77 degrees, 76, 77, plus or minus 1 or 2 degrees. And that's what is still safe for insulin up to the expiration date. Not the expiration date, up to 28 days for most insulins. There are some diabetes medications that have a 42-day excursion at that temperature, and there is one that has a 56-day excursion at that temperature. So while it is true, insulin can stay at or below room temperature, it is also true that it cannot get over 86 degrees. And that's where the misunderstanding comes in, because sometimes people hear, I hear the story, my doctor told me once it's out of the fridge, it can stay out of the fridge, and that's not a problem. That's true if the temperature is always in those mid-70s. However, as we have, whether or not you believe in global warming, temperatures are getting hotter, summer excursions are there, and people travel to places where they want to be warm. And many times it is over 86 degrees. For those situations, you need to keep your insulin cool and safely below the 86.
Yeah, it's a great clarification because I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and from April to October, it can be over the 80s. We could have crazy 90-degree days here and there. And so we are always, my son was diagnosed right before he turned 2. And when you have kids, you're always at the beach or the pool during the summer, and They're always outside. So we always had to figure out a way to keep it not cold, but at that room temperature. And that's so hard to do sometimes. So look, this whole segment, I know, we're not trying to make a big commercial for Frio. I'm really interested in your story. But to me, that's one of the really big advantages of it because it's, you don't always have access to ice. You don't always want to schlep a cooler. So, Dan, let me ask you, talk about what actually happens with a Frio, jumping off of what Lisa had been explaining.
First of all, the way you activate a Frio is you simply soak it in water. So it's very easy to do, and what's very nice is wherever you are, there should be water. Otherwise, you have a bigger problem. And then after you soak it, you get 2 to 4 days of cooling. It cools as long as it evaporates, and in general, that's 2 to 4 days. And then at that point, simply because some of the water evaporated, it's time to re-soak it for a few minutes, and then you get 2 to 4 days again. So it really is an infinity of not being dependent on anything but water to keep the medication cool.
And again, what temperature does the Frio keep it at?
The Frio is going to keep, once it's activated, it's going to keep the temperature between 64.4 and 78.8, even in temperatures of 100 degrees. And you get a minimum of 45 hours in those temperatures. And what the beauty of it is, what we saw right away, is that even in an emergency when the power is out, you get at least 28 days to get to a new source of insulin, as long as you have access to water. And as Dan said, if you don't have water, you're in bigger trouble than if you didn't have insulin. Water is the necessity of life, and the two work well together. So while you may not be able to save your entire refrigerator full of insulin, you have at least a month to get to a new source of insulin, and that's priceless.
And here's another issue. So besides the issue of needing to keep the insulin cool, there's the issue of when you try to keep your insulin cool, you freeze your insulin. I know that happened to me many times. So usually it was on the warmest days. I made sure that the ice pack, I had one of those insulated ice packs for my vials. Make sure that the ice pack is really cold and frozen. And I put my insulin in there, and then when I displaced the air, it really reminded me of Superman's Fortress of Solitude, where suddenly I'm sort of aging myself from the movies in the 70s. But suddenly you could see the ice crystals form, and then your insulin was useless. So ironically, where you're trying to keep it cool, the problem was that it was too cold.
And one other thing that goes along with that is when you go into those hotels, those little mini fridges are not calibrated the same way as your home refrigerator is. And many times you put something in there, it's going to freeze whatever's around it if it's too close to the little ice section. And that's the last thing you want to do is have your insulin frozen while you're on vacation. It messes everything up.
Yeah, been there, done that.
Oh, I think we all have. Those refrigerators in the hotel rooms can be, horrible for insulin. They just freeze everything, so you do have to be very, very careful. Yeah. Dan, I'm curious. So you went from the earthquake, and that, just sparked the idea and some other things. But more recently, you all helped in Puerto Rico. I was reading that you donated a bunch of Frios. Let me ask you how that came about. Do you have any connections there? Did you just hear about it? What happened?
When we heard about it, we knew that there was something that we had to do. Because if you think about it, if you remember on the news in the first days after the hurricane, the mayor of Puerto Rico, Senator Rubio, everyone was on TV talking about the various problems. But the first problem that they brought up was the issue of keeping medication cool. And oh my goodness, out of all the things, this is specifically what we do. So we absolutely had to do something. So we called government agencies, we called the larger organizations, and we got limited response. But then an amazing thing happened. When it was on the news, we got scores of calls, hundreds of calls from people wanting to help. So very quickly,
the phone started ringing early in the morning, and it was nonstop about, did you know, you have to do something, you have to help. But we were already in the process of getting these things done.
So very quickly, all of this money was raised to help subsidize sending the Frios out. All kinds of private organizations worked to get it out there. Jorge Posada, the Hall of Fame catcher for the Yankees, chartered a plane to send supplies, including Frios, out to Puerto Rico. As time went on, a major insulin company subsidized 15,000 Frios to go out to Puerto Rico. So before you know it, we sent 25,000 Frios out to Puerto Rico.
Wow.
And if you think about it, an island of 3 million people, around 1% with type 1 diabetes, it basically covered the needs of everyone with type 1 diabetes. So it was such a wonderful experience for us to be a part of that.
Wow. Lisa, when the phone was ringing, can you take us back to that day and what you were thinking?
So I can take you back exactly. So we heard the news report, and what was interesting is the phone started ringing. I'm a Frio user. I use insulin. Did you know that they need this in Puerto Rico? And we were very well aware. As Dan had mentioned, we were trying to contact the infrastructure centers on the East Coast to try and help. But infrastructure is what was missing. There was a huge thing. Planes were not able to fly there. The ability to get the Frio there was the problem. So what we worked together with several people who had come forward is to help develop a network, an infrastructure network, and that's where the plane charter came in. We also, through one person and another person, were put in touch with the head pediatric endocrinologist on the island, and everybody worked together. We did our part by assembling the order. We worked straight through from early morning to late at night, weekends, nights, everything in order to package everything up. We overnighted Frio to Florida to where the centers were, and then that got loaded onto a plane. It was chartered to go over to Puerto Rico. The doctors and teams that were over there received it, and then they distributed the Frio there. And what's important to note is that the reason there was such a problem in Puerto Rico is the power is out. It was not out for one day. It was not out for 2 days. The power was out in Puerto Rico for 11 months. And there are satellite photos that show the difference between before the hurricane and after the hurricane, and 95% of the island is blacked out because there is no power.
And all of this in tropical weather.
Tropical weather, and as we said, while we may not be able to save everything that's in your refrigerator, it gives you at least a month to get to a new source of insulin. And they were able to get new sources of insulin onto the island on a monthly basis. And so with that whole setup, we were able to keep people going for the length of time. But it is definitely an eye-opener that when power goes out, what do you do?
Yeah. So, Dan, you have lived with type 1 for a long time, as you said. Do you mind if I get personal for a minute? How do you manage your diabetes? Do you wear a pump or use a CGM? You know, it's changed a lot since 1986.
All right, so my system is a little bit different from maybe some other people, and so I'm not advocating it for everyone, but it works for me. So I have a CGM. Oh, my goodness. CGM brought my A1C down by over a point from what it was before. It's just amazing. But I have my CGM, the measurements on the receiver, basically my phone, in one pocket. In my other pocket, I have my insulin. I have actually a vial and a syringe, and I keep it in a Frio. So basically, whenever I hear that little beep from the Dexcom CGM, I take a shot. So I'm definitely MDI, and bottom line, I'm keeping my A1C at about 7.0. So it seems to be working.
So you're old school MDI. You're a syringe.
That's correct. Very old school. Why? No good reason, except it works. You know, and the combination of the CGM and being able to keep my insulin with me at all times, that basically allows me to do it. And, you know, of course, I have Lantus for basal and Humalog for bolus. So it works well.
We're just nosy around here. I always like to ask what people do because everybody is different. Everybody does have their own way of managing. Before I let you go, and don't laugh at me, as I said earlier, we have used Frio products for years and years, and especially when Benny was younger and we spent so much time at the pool with him. But I found that, you know, when you're activating the Frio cases, they can get kind of overly puffy if you're not careful. We use like the small wallet, and I would put a spoon or a couple of things in there before I activated it. Any recommendations?
I can answer that.
Yes. Give me the better way to use the real way that I'm supposed to be doing that, because I know that's not the right way.
But it's a great question to ask, because you're not the first one that this has happened to. The big thing to remember is that the soaking times that come in the instructions are estimates, because the gel crystals are going to absorb water depending on the size. It's going to make a difference. The way that I have figured it out is if you soak the wallet till it looks like it's about halfway puffed up, for lack of a better word, then you take it out of the water, you pat it dry, and you let it sit for about 5-10 minutes. And during that time, the gel crystals are going to continue to absorb all that extra drippy water, and it's going to continue to swell. Kind of like when you're cooking a steak and you want it to be pink inside, you take it out before it is fully cooked, and because when you take it out, it's going to continue to cook. It's kind of the same concept. After the fabric looks like it's dry to the touch, and it does look like it's dry to the touch and not too long a time, then you put your medication in, whether it's your pens or your vials or your pump, whatever it is. After the medication is inside, then you give the tubes a little gentle squeeze. You want it to be firm after the medication is. If it is still soft and floppy, then pull your contents out, whether it's the pump or the medication, and soak it a little bit longer. But you don't want to over-soak it because you're going to have a lot of trouble getting the medication in, and it's going to put pressure on it. So it's always easier to add more water than to wait for it to evaporate away.
Yes, great points, because I have done that, and then you can't get anything in the wallet. It's too puffy.
And Stacey, one other thing to mention that
Sure.
I don't think we talked about is insulin is not the only medication that works in a Frio. There are so many medications that are out there that, in general purposes, for long-term storage, you want to keep it in a refrigerator. But many medications have storage requirements that allow you to keep it and travel safely in a Frio. So people who don't travel, that say, I don't go anywhere anymore because it's too hard with the medication, this kind of solves that problem. And what Dan likes to say is that it gives you the convenience of traveling and going anywhere you want. It gives you the freedom to do it, and it gives you the peace of mind of knowing that you're going to always have your medication safe and at a good, stable temperature.
And Dan, let me ask you, are there any concerns going through an airport with a Frio? Because sometimes they don't like gels.
Right. Well, no, because I have gone through the airport so many times now and have not had a problem at all. So I simply go through, I don't take it out to show them. I'm sort of that world of ask forgiveness later rather than permission now. But it's really nothing to ask forgiveness for. It is totally kosher for a Frio to go through TSA. TSA has citation that specifically addresses this. Not specifically addresses the Frio, but specifically addresses insulin coolers, and a cooler like a Frio is allowed to go through. So I've gone through many, many times, have not been asked about it. On occasion, I was that person that is patted down. So first of all, they feel the sensor on my CGM and go, what is that? Mm-hmm. And then the next thing when they say the Frio, I simply explain what it is, and it's not a problem at all. We always advise people, and I do the same, is to be sure to have a doctor's note and or the prescription with you as you go through TSA.
And Stacey, for your listeners, what you might want to let them know is that if they go to tsa.gov, and once they're there, they search for medically necessary liquids or passengers with diabetes, basically gives you all of the information that you need. And the section that they need to look at is a section that's marked accessories. And basically, to paraphrase, what it says is that while TSA prefers to have cooling packs, frozen solid, if it's not frozen solid, if it's in a gel or a slush form, as long as it's required to keep your medication cool, it is allowable. It may be subject to inspection. And as TSA has the right to inspect everything for obvious reasons, they have the right to inspect this. So if a situation like that comes up, just allow them to inspect it, let them swab it, and if you have any questions or concerns or something's not going the way you want, then just politely ask for a supervisor and ask you questions there. But they should know what TSA says.
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, thank you both so much for sharing the story behind the Frio and the story behind the people behind it as well, Dan and Lisa. I really appreciate it. As I said, we've used it for a very long time and are very happy with it, but I never really thought about how it came to be. And that story is just fascinating. But thank you so much for spending some time with me.
Oh, we really appreciate the opportunity to let people know. And, I know that we sent you that information about saving some money on it. So just want to let you know that if there's ever any questions, you can always ask us. We will give you firsthand experience of our life with and without the Frio. So your listeners can always call and ask whatever questions they have.
Oh, that's great. I really appreciate that, Lisa. And Dan, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having us.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
More information about the Frio, about Dan's story, all of that at diabetes-connections.com. You can find out more in the Facebook group or in the show notes. You know how this works if you're a longtime listener. But if you're new, we have a great Facebook group. It's Diabetes Connections, the group. And that's a great way to communicate with me and a great way to get more information about each show. Of course, all the links and information is in the show notes. So if you're listening on a podcast app, it is there for you. I have to tell you, we are working on the Diabetes Connections website. There's a redo going on. We had some issues with it earlier this month, so it's a little fussy right now, I would say. So if you're having any trouble finding the show, just click onto Facebook or social media and let me know, but it should be fixed pretty soon. In our community connection this week, let's talk about the Diabetes Empowerment Summit, a summit that you don't even have to get out of your pajamas for. Community Connection is brought to you by Tandem Diabetes Care, makers of the t:slim X2 insulin pump. The Diabetes Empowerment Summit is coming up fast. It is May 1st through 5th, and it is an online diabetes conference. It's for people with diabetes, caregivers like me, and healthcare practitioners. And Danielle Hargenrader, who is better known perhaps online as Diabetes Dominator, and we've had her on the show before, puts this on for the last couple of years now. And it is a really just jam-packed conference that you can watch from the comfort of your home. And what's nice too is that, you're not paying for travel. You're not getting out of your PJs if you don't want to. And you can pick and choose which presenters most appeal to you. This is really a who's who of diabetes help. There are people like Dana Lewis, creator of the Do-It-Yourself Pancreas System. There are people like Crystal Oram, who founded Diabetes Strong. Ginger Vieira, who's written a wonderful book on diabetes and pregnancy, but also talks about celiac and fibromyalgia. You've got people here from One Drop and the founder of Diagnosed Not Defeated and Black Diabetic Info, the chief medical officer at Mankind, which makes Afrezza. There are so many people here. I will link it up. You can go through the list yourself. Oh, Chris Rudin is there too, of course, who you know from the Titan Games and from this show. It's a really great list. It's got something for everybody. And I hear a lot from people who, I talk about conferences that I'm going to, and I'm very fortunate to be able to do that. I get it. It's hard to travel. I mean, I'm kind of picky about where I go to, only because I love to go everywhere. But, you have to be careful about time away from family, time on the road. Is this good for your health? But this is one where you don't have to leave your house, and you can learn a lot and really gain from it. And Danielle's the real deal. So again, more information on the Diabetes Empowerment Summit. It starts May 1st. So definitely jump on this soon and check it out. Tell Me Something Good. Yes, it is my favorite part of the show each week. Tell Me Something Good is brought to you by Real Good Foods. And, in our house, my husband Slade, who has type 2 diabetes, probably tries to eat low carb the most out of any of us. I'm a big proponent of the everything in moderation. We do a lot of lower carb dinners. And probably breakfast. I guess lunch is probably the carbiest meal in our house, just in terms of packing lunches and that kind of thing. But my husband really does, if anybody's going to eat low carb, it's him. So when we started keeping Real Good Foods stuff in the house, I'll be honest with you, he did not try it right away. So I haven't talked about his reaction because he hasn't tried much. But the other night, I smelled something delicious, and I came downstairs. He was making one of the pizzas in a frying pan. Now, he's a much better cook than I am. So I was like, what are you doing? That's supposed to be in the oven or the toaster oven. And he was like, well, if you read it right here, it says this is the best way to get it crispy. And of course, I hadn't really looked at the label very carefully. And I guess he had toasted it and then put it in the pan. I don't know what he did with it, but it smelled so good. And he said it came out so great. It was really crispy and satisfying. I love Real Good Foods. They have those cauliflower crust pizzas, the poppers, and they're in the grocery store or Walmart freezer. I mean, you can order online. That's a great way to get the mixed packs. They have the breakfast sandwiches now. But, it is really hard, I find, to grab lower carb stuff that tastes good just right in the grocery store. We go to Harris Teeter down the block, and they always have it. Real Good Foods makes it easy. Find out more. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Real Good Foods logo. Couple of great ladies in Tell Me Something Good this week. Congratulations to Julia Buckley. I met Julia at Friends for Life, I want to say last summer or the year before, because she was looking for a place to sit and said, can I sit here? And I said, of course. And then we got to talking. And she's terrific. She's an adult with type 1. But she posted in the Facebook group about graduating from the breast surgeon. And I asked her if she wouldn't mind just sharing a few more details about that, not to get too personal, but what was that about? So she shared that 5 years ago, she had an infection. She said it was like fever, felt like she had the flu, very, very, very painful. And then she went to her doctor, and as soon as they felt it, they sent her right to sonogram, right to the surgeon. He did a guided biopsy, and that touched off 5 years of visits every 6 months, with sonograms or mammograms every 6 months. And she said, I graduated back to yearly which is great news. I asked her if diabetes kind of played any role, not necessarily in developing something like that, but in managing your diabetes on a day when you're going through so much stress, at a time when you're going through lots of tests. And she said that, of course, infections are harder to treat when you have diabetes, especially if you have a higher A1C, things like that. So it might take more antibiotics to cure something, but she doesn't really think that that applied too much to her. But we had a really interesting conversation about it. And the bottom line is she's doing great. And as she said in the beginning, she graduated from the breast surgeon, which is always really good news. Hey, it doesn't have to be all about diabetes all the time, right? Just living with diabetes. Give me whatever you want to celebrate, whatever is important to you. And the other person I want to focus on is Renza Scibilia, who I'm pretty sure is speaking at the Diabetes Empowerment Summit as well that I mentioned last segment. And we spoke to Renza a couple of months ago. I think that the headline on her was deliberately non-compliant. She is the writer of Diabetogenic, which is her blog in Australia. Well, it's worldwide because it's a blog, but she lives in Australia. And earlier in April, she posted her 1,000th post on her blog, which is pretty amazing to think about. I will link up her blog. You can scroll down because she's written like 5 or 6 since then. She's very prolific and she's very gifted in terms of writing, but I will link it up. One of the things that Renza has written about that has really stayed with me, and I asked her if this was hers, and she said no, she'd heard it along the way somewhere. She writes about nothing about us without us. And I think that's a rallying cry that we should all take up, right? No insulin hearings without us. No pricing questions without us. No doctor conferences without us. No research. No pump design without us. And she writes in that 1,000th post, I am not the tattooing type, but if I was, I think I would have this phrase, nothing about us without us, inked on my body somewhere. I just love it. She's brought so many great issues to my attention and maybe to yours as well. So Renza, congratulations. Oh, I didn't even mention, and she's marking 21 years with type 1 this year. So Renza, please keep writing. Please keep being non-compliant. I should warn you, if you're going to her blog, she is not shy about the swear words, which is fine for blogging, not the best for podcasting. I did have to bleep her out, though, when I had her on. So just be warned, she is not afraid of a few bad words here and there. Congratulations all around, Renza. You continue to be one of the leaders that I look up to, one of the best writers I've ever had the pleasure of reading. And please, 1,000 and keep going strong. If you have a Tell Me Something Good story, the easiest thing to do is join the Facebook group, Diabetes Connections, the group. There's a big post that I kind of keep going back to there where I ask for these stories. You can also email me, Stacey at diabetes-connections.com, or, throw something my way on Instagram or wherever you are. Hopefully I'm there too. I want to make it easy for you. But please let me know what's going good in your life, any milestone, anniversary, or accomplishment that you just, you want to shout it from the mountain. Let's help each other out and tell me something good. In addition to Endgame coming this week, we also have an appointment with Benny's endocrinologist. I don't usually share numbers, and I don't plan on doing it this time, but I do want to share some progress because, as I've mentioned, he's really changed things up in the last 6 months, and I'm interested to see what kind of official results that we get. Of course, in the way that it works, we've had amazing numbers for almost 3 months, and then this past week, some shenanigans kicked in, and we've had higher numbers than we've had in forever. So doesn't that always happen right before you go to the endo? It's like, oh, how dare you? But diabetes likes to keep us on our toes. So we got a little too comfortable, I guess, and it just wanted to shake us up. So we made some adjustments and we'll go from there. But overall, it's really been an interesting change, and I'm excited to share that with you. Benny says he's happy to talk about it. So we're going to do an interview with him. Probably will not have that for you next week, just in the way these things work, but probably in 2 weeks, or maybe we'll do a special episode. But lots of fun stuff coming up. If you like the show, if you've listened all the way through to this point, do me a favor. Share the show with somebody else. Send an email to a friend or text them a link or share it on social media. I'm finding that a lot of people see it online but don't really understand what it is, even when podcasts are now more common than they ever have been. I still get people telling me that they don't have time to watch the podcast, or they're not sure if they have to pay for it or where to get it. So let's do some education out there. I'm trying to think of some fun ways to get the word out. I think the best way is you, because you're here, you get it, you found it. So maybe let some other people in the community know about it, and let's share these stories. Thank you so much. I need to thank my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. Always appreciate his help. And thank you for listening. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here next week.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.